feedback.
Okay. No plan.
I said I'd bring it, I thought it'd be on here, but it's not. Okay.
I got it on the table. I've noticed
7:30.
use that frequently.
You're standing right here.
Is everybody ready? Please ready. We'll call this meeting of the Bridgewater Town Council to order. Could we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Just please ask for a brief moment of silence in recognition of veterans and those who have passed, specifically tonight to the family of Albert E. Wood upon his passing on October 17th, 2019. Mr. Wood served in the United States Marine Corps during the Vietnam War. Thank you, and good evening, everybody, and welcome to our November 5th Bridgewater Town Council meeting. Just want to remind everybody that this meeting is being aired live and being recorded for replay at certain times throughout the month. I'll entertain a motion for the approval of the minutes from our previous meeting.
So moved.
There's a motion and there's a second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Minutes are passed. Announcements from the president. I have one announcement here tonight, just to remind everybody in the town, on behalf of the Bridgewater Veterans Council, you are cordially invited to join us to participate in this year's annual Tri-Town Veterans Day Parade. The 2019 parade will be held in West Bridgewater on Monday, November 11th. Asking everyone, the contingents, to assemble at 9 o'clock a.m. on Stepping Stone Drive. Step off will be at 10 a.m., turning south onto East Elm Street and marching up towards Main Street into the Town Hall parking lot. Ceremonies will be held at the gazebo. Parade participants are invited for a coalition which will be held at St. Anne's Parish Center following the ceremony. There will be a judged competition for best marching unit, best float or theme, and judges' choice trophies. This year's theme is titled, "We Must Never Forget Your Sacrifices." Any group wishing to participate in a float should state your intentions at the time you respond to participating so that the council and adjoining towns can plan accordingly. The citizens of the towns of the Veterans Council always appreciate and look forward to your participation in these observances. So I hope a few of us will be able to go there and march as a town. So we'll meet on Stepping Stone Drive or somewhere there Monday morning on the 11th. I do not have any proclamations this evening. Citizens Open Forum. Are there any citizens here that wish to speak during the Citizens Open Forum portion of the meeting? Anybody at all? Just please stand up, take the microphone, and identify yourself for the record.
Good evening. My name is Mrs. Rebecca W. Bowens, and I live at 130 Spring Hill Avenue in Bridgewater, the extension. And my complaint is this, that I've been living in the town for a whole lot of years, and right now I'm having problems, and I've been having problems for a long time. My property abuts Fox Run. So I am at the extension of Spring Hill Avenue. And when it rains or water or anything comes, everything comes down at the end of the street. And all of that water, guess where it goes? in my driveway. And my driveway is green with mold. They come down and they dig a trench or something like that, but the water goes around, and all of it is in my driveway. So if you want to come and look at it, you can see it. It's green. And I've had my driveway paved so many times, and it's to the point now where I'm kind of tired of it, and I think the town should be able to help me. So then, what I want to speak about is my property has been damaged quiet of enjoyment, backup water on my land. Please, you must cure the defect that you caused. When Fox Run came, that property was owned by Snyder. It was nothing but farm there. I think it was 30 acres of land or whatever it was. A farm, tractor, he was nice, we would come and we would talk. When they sold the property to Fox Run, and Fox Run built condominiums, then they have a fence. There's no drain at the end of it. So all of that water comes down, and it lands in my driveway. Nothing but mold, and I'm tired of digging it up. And the town does come, the highway department comes, and they try to do what they can. And the last time the highway department came, they said it should have been a drain down there, but they can't do anything because the drain should have been put in on Fox Run's property. That's the answer I get. So thank you for listening.
Is there anybody else here this evening that wishes to speak during the citizens' open forum portion of our meeting? Anybody at all? Seeing none, we'll move on to appointments where there are none. Seeing the time is now 7:33, we'll move on to item F, which is our hearings for this evening. We have at 7:33 p.m. public hearing petition P2019-024 Class 2 Auto Dealer's License, JCC Motors, Inc., 808 Bedford Street. This measure has been duly advertised for a public hearing and may be finally considered for this evening. So I'll now open the public hearing on this petition. Is there anybody here that wishes to speak on behalf of this petition? Anybody at all? Is there anyone here that wishes to speak in favor? In favor of this petition? Anybody here wishing to speak in favor of this petition? Seeing none, is there anybody here in the public wishes to speak in opposition to this petition? Anybody here wishes to speak in opposition? Seeing none, I'll open it up to my colleagues on the council for any questions. I'll just refer briefly to the town manager for a brief explanation.
Mr. President, this petition was presented and has met all the internal requirements for a Class 2 license, and so I would encourage council to vote.
Any questions from the councilors? Mr. George?
Through you to Mr. Dutton. So it says here will be held until fire inspection completed. Do we know when that's going to be?
I believe that was done today.
Today?
I believe so.
Any word on?
No issues.
Okay.
No, well, I take it back. I've not had reported to me any negative issues.
Okay.
Anyone else? I know we all closed the public hearing at 7:38. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
There's a motion and there's a second to approve. Any comments, questions? This is a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? So the petition is granted. Moving on to 7:35, public hearing, order FY 20014, transfer order High Street Dam and Bridge preliminary work. At their meeting held on September 3rd, 2019, the Budget and Finance Committee voted 3-0 to recommend approval of this measure. This measure was duly advertised in the enterprise and on the town's website for a public hearing. On 9/3/19, the town council continued this hearing to 9/17/19, pending disposition of the Finance Committee. On 9/17, the town council continued the hearing to 10/1, pending disposition from the finance committee. On 10/1, the town council continued this measure to 11/15/19 at 7:35 PM. On 11/15/19, this measure was further continued to 11/5, pending disposition of the finance committee. At their meeting held on 10/28/19, the finance committee voted 5-0 to return this measure to the council with suggestions for at their meeting held on 10/28/19, amendments to be considered, with suggestions for their amendments to be considered. This measure may be finally considered this evening at the conclusion of the hearing. So this hearing is now open. Is the petitioner, or I'll refer to the town manager on this, even though the finance committee voted to return this, does that suffice the action enough, even though it's not a yea or a nay vote, for us to take action tonight, right?
I wouldn't want to put words in the Finance Committee's mouth, but I think they voted favorably.
Oh, okay.
But did recommend, for your purposes, one simple amendment, and I will give you that if it suits, and it's retitling the order so that it says transfer order, High Street preliminary engineering work instead of High Street Dam and Bridge. This, as I've mentioned, I think here and also to Budget and Finance and the Finance Committee, the wording on this was somewhat unfortunate. This is actually our portion or our contribution to the engineering work that's being done on the preliminary work being done on the dam removal as well as the bridge replacement. What we had asked, or what we were asked, was if we would like to participate in the engineering from Main Street, for High Street, from Main Street to the bridge, since they're so interconnected, utilities and drainage are so interconnected with the actual bridge. We chose we opted for that because the engineering was going to get done at a much cheaper rate than we could otherwise do it. So that is what this pays for. It does not go towards the work that's being done, engineering work being done on the dam itself, which is privately owned, nor the bridge itself, which is right now a state project, which we'll be hearing a lot more about very shortly. But this merely pays for the engineering work for the utilities and the drainage on High Street from Main Street to the bridge.
Is there anybody here from the general public to ask any general questions? Anybody here at all from the public? Anyone from the public here wishing to speak in favor? Anyone else from the public that wishes to speak in favor? Anyone from the public wishes to speak in opposition to this order? Seeing none, I'll refer to my colleagues for any questions to the town manager. No questions? Mr. Souza, yeah.
The amendment, has that been written up and presented to change that language? Because I think there was an amendment made to change it to specify from Main Street to the bridge, not including the bridge.
So I would suggest that changing the title to High Street Preliminary Engineering Work, and I will be happy to work with the council clerk to make sure that the explanation, which you don't technically vote, but make sure that the explanation refers to what I just mentioned, that the work is from Main Street to the bridge. Be happy to do that.
Thank you. Any other questions? I will now close the public hearing at 7:43. I'll entertain a motion.
So motion to approve?
Second.
There's a motion.
Motion to amend is I'm sorry.
Yep.
Motion to amend is indicated?
There's a motion to amend as indicated, and there's a second. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, this requires just a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So the order has been amended. Now I'll entertain, we already have a motion and a second to approve. This does require a roll call vote and requires a 2/3 vote of the full council, so it requires 6 yes votes.
Yes.
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 George,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus, Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
8 in favor, none against.
Now open the hearing at 7:40, Order FY 20023, Loan Order Community Septic Management Program, CSMP loans. At the meeting held on October 1st, 2019, the Budget and Finance Committee voted 2-0 to recommend approval. The Finance Committee voted 5-0 to recommend approval at their meeting held on 10/28/19. This measure has been duly advertised in the enterprise and on the town's website for a public hearing and may be finally considered upon the conclusion of this hearing. So the public hearing is now open. I'll ask the petitioner or the town manager to speak briefly about this program.
Mr. President, the Community Septic Management Program was created in the mid-'90s by the state legislature to assist homeowners in defraying the cost of required septic repairs and replacements. This is money that originates from the state revolving fund and comes to communities similar, well, all communities have the availability, but communities such as Bridgewater, so that we can provide betterment funds for those who couldn't otherwise afford to do the septic upgrades. So as a practical matter, what happens is that this we submit an application for additional funding. We will get a $400,000 chunk of money. We will segregate that and then lend that out to folks that make application to the program. And once they sell their homes, if they sell, then they have to repay that money back into the fund. But we have been fairly successful in upgrading a number of septic systems through this program, and the funds have dwindled down, so we are looking to replenish it.
Are there any questions from the general public regarding this order? Any questions from the general public regarding this order? Seeing none, any member of the public here wishes to speak in favor of this order? Any member of the public here wishes to speak in favor? Any member of the public here wishing to speak in opposition to this order? Anyone here wishes to speak in opposition to this order? Seeing none, I'll open it up to any questions from the councilors. Mr. Columbotus.
Mr. President. Mr. Dutton, what is the mechanism by which, is a lien put on the attached to the parcel when they're
Correct.
loaned?
Correct. A municipal lien is placed on the parcel, which just guarantees payment back into the fund if the house is sold within the time period that requires repayment.
And will the interest and associated fees be borne by the borrowers or by the town?
All of the fees, we borrow at no interest, I believe, and then
okay.
extend for a little bit of interest, which covers our costs. So essentially the borrower bears all of the administrative expense.
Right. So there's there's no net cost to the town, and it basically enables homeowners to get a better, to get a loan
Get along
more
to
easily and
upgrade.
at a lower rate than they otherwise would.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds like a good idea. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, the time being 7:48, I'll close the public hearing and entertain a motion to approve order.
Second.
There's a motion and there's a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, this does require a roll call vote by just a majority of those present.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
Mr. Rushton.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mr. Wood.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
8 in favor, none against.
I'm sorry, that did require a two-thirds. I read the one beneath it. Anyway.
Still passed.
It still passed, so the votes were there. Okay, so time being 7:45, I'll open up the hearing FY 20026, the free cash allocation to the trusts. At their meeting held on 10/15/2019, the Budget and Finance Committee voted 3-0 to recommend approval. The Finance Committee voted 5-0 to recommend approval at their meeting held on 10/28. This measure has been duly advertised in the enterprise and on the town's website for a public hearing and may be finally considered upon the conclusion of the hearing. So this hearing on the free cash allocation to the trust funds is open. I'll entertain the petitioner or the town manager to speak briefly regarding this order.
Mr. President, this is our, what is usually a yearly exercise, allocating the town's free cash, certified free cash into various buckets from which it can be further appropriated. As you know, but for public consumption, the free cash amount, $2,501,366, is proposed to be allocated among the General Fund Stabilization Trust Fund, which, as we know, is stabilization, to the tune of $483,102. This brings the stabilization fund up to a healthy amount, the recommended 10% of our general fund, overall general fund budget. Capital Stabilization Fund, as you know, we are trying to fund a lot of the capital needs of the departments, but that amount is $1,531,188. We're allocating $100,000 towards the OPEB Stabilization Fund, which is, quite frankly, a paltry amount relative to the liability, but it is a good sign when rating agencies review our bond, indebtedness and give us a rating. So again, that's the OPEB Stabilization Fund for $100,000. Employee Liability Stabilization Fund, this is basically sick buyback fund, and we're funding that with $250,000, knowing that we will expend at least that in this fiscal year due to a healthy dose of retirements. Finally, we've funded a little bit in the other one-time unforeseen stabilization account of $137,076.
Are there any general questions from the public regarding this order? Any general questions from the public? Seeing none, any questions from the public? Anybody here from the public wishes to speak in favor of this order? Anybody here from the public wishes to speak in favor? Anyone here from the public wishes to speak in opposition to this order? Is anyone here from the public wishes to speak in opposition? Seeing none, I'll open it up to questions from any counselor regarding this order. Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Mr. Dutton, OPEB, just explain that for the people, other than pension employee benefits. So it's for folks who are retired or will retire and benefits that we will owe them by contract, correct?
Or by law. So generally, Massachusetts general law requires that municipalities or municipal entities continue to offer a number of benefits, but in this case specifically, the costly one is health benefits. So traditionally, similar to the way that retirement was years ago, towns never accounted for that liability on their balance sheet. Now with changes in the governmental accounting standards guidelines, we now have to account for that and begin to fund it. And so this, excuse me, is a way to begin to fund that. So it's the town putting money away now to fund a future liability, specifically retiree health care.
So now that we've successfully put everyone to sleep, I have another question. Other one-time unforeseen stabilization, and I know the finance director has gone through this, but how he views the difference between that capital stabilization and just the general stabilization?
Good question. I'll try not to put people to sleep. General fund stabilization is designed the way we have structured it, and I think most towns structure it. That is designed to carry us over an economic downturn. So general stabilization, when we have something like we had in 2010, 2010, and the economy dips, our local receipts, our taxes remain stable for the most part, but our local receipts generally drop precipitously. So in order for us to continue to employ the limited number of police or fire or general government employees or teachers or what have you, we want to make sure we put away enough money so that we can make up for a future shortfall in our revenues. So that's general fund stabilization. Capital stabilization is essentially the buildings, the equipment, the machines that are used by our staff, hopefully on a day-to-day basis to get the work done that they need to get done. Other one-time unforeseen stabilization we created when we recognized that there were a number of items that came up during the year that we were using the capital stabilization fund to appropriate from, but really didn't, weren't specifically capital. So engineering work is a great example. If we were going to do some engineering work, and we are going to do some engineering work on a number of streets shortly, that really more appropriately comes out of other one-time stabilization rather than capital stabilization.
And I'd hope one of those might be the Spring Hill Ave extension.
I'm now added to my list.
Any other questions, Mr. Rushton?
If I could just follow up, OPEB stabilization, are you aware of, or is there any mechanism in place that would protect some of the funds that are transferred in there? In other words, you're talking about 2008 and 9, the stabilization fund. Would we be looking to dip into that? Can we dip into it, or is it protected, the contributions into that account?
That great question. We would not dip into that anytime soon. Our efforts will be to continue to fund it little by little. Overall, we have a liability that's well north of $30 million. So doing it $100,000 at a time isn't going to get us there. Isn't going to, we're not playing catch up by any means. But we are showing a good faith effort to at least put money away into it. So we haven't even discussed money coming out of it, to tell you the truth, at this point, because it's such a small amount. I think we've got somewhere maybe close to 400,000 in there now, somewhere in that range. So it would require a vote of the council to move it, but we're not proposing that come out anytime soon.
And if I could just follow up, so you're talking about new accounting practices that sort of expose this liability and to start putting money away for it. Could I ask you, do you know how we compare to other towns? I mean, it sounds scary when you say 30 million out there, but this is common amongst other towns in terms of just identifying this unfunded liability, and many towns are in the same position, or are we sort of an outlier?
Almost every town in the state is in the same position. Almost every city is in the same position. Every municipal entity, whether it be a fire district or a state agency or university, for instance, is in the same position. So there are a very small handful of towns that probably at least a decade ago recognized that this was coming on and did address it in one way or another, whether they borrowed right then to fully fund. I think there were a few towns that did that, and there were a few towns that more aggressively planned for this, but the vast majority of cities and towns in the state did not. So they all have multi-millions of dollars worth of liability.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Mr. Fitzgibbons? Mr. George?
Nope.
I just want to follow up on Councilor Rushton. We'll be able to start putting quote-unquote real money in that OPEB stabilization when we fully funded our pension liability, correct?
That is our plan, and I believe that's, I think, up to 2030, 2032?
It's 2028.
2028? So
we're
after
getting there.
2028.
We're getting there, and there's kind of a longer-term clear goal. And then just to really follow up on Councilor Rushton on the ability to, what I'll call, raid the fund, because I heard you talk about protections, and if I'm wrong, please follow up. But essentially, any town council in the future could make a motion to take that money and spend it however they'd like. This is just a mechanism to segregate it and be able to show in an accounting form that we have money set aside, but any town council can make a motion to spend any money they want in any way they want.
I believe that's correct, but I will get a more precise answer.
Okay. I would hope that never happened, but
Do it?
Counselor Wood.
Thank you. This is great, because when I first created the first budget resolution, we had a negative free cash, like negative $750,000. So now we have a very positive number that we can move into these stabilization funds. The question I have for you, Michael, is, so there's a relationship in our operational budget with snow and ice budget, because characteristically, we're allowed to under budget in the operational budget. So if we had a tough year last year, how would that affected these numbers that we're seeing today?
So we raise snow and ice deficits. I think as most of the counselors know, we can technically only overexpend in one line item, and that's snow and ice, for obvious reasons, because you don't know how much snow and ice you're going to get. So if we were to have significantly overspent more than we did last year, you would see a smaller number in the free cash figure. I guess that's the best way to put it.
Thank you.
Anything else? I'll close the public hearing at 8:01. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion, there's a second to approve. Any discussion on the motion? This does require a majority of those present and voting. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Souza?
Yes.
Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Wood?
Yes.
Mr. George?
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. Rushton?
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus?
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons?
Yes.
8 in favor, none against.
Time being 8:01, I'll open up the public hearing. Order FY 20027, transfer order, capital transfer roadway drainage, Flag Street. At their meeting held on 10/15/19, the Budget and Finance Committee voted 3-0 to recommend approval. The Finance Committee voted 5-0 to recommend approval at their meeting held on 10/28. This measure has been duly advertised in the Enterprise and on the town's website for a public hearing, and may be finally considered upon the conclusion of the hearing. So I will ask the petitioner or the town manager to speak regarding this.
Thank you, Mr. President. This request is for a repair of the drainage on Flag Street. I think, as I mentioned and showed a little bit last meeting or a couple of meetings ago, our highway superintendent had commissioned the scoping, essentially, of the drainage system on Flag. He also has done other streets in town. In Flag Street, he realized, or the report came back, and there was a substantial failure or imminent failure of the drainage system, due mostly to the installation of corrugated metal pipe, which has now begun to disintegrate and rust. In order to this is not probably the normal process that we would use. In order to allocate the funds, it would be on the capital plan. We would get it in front of the council for approval on the capital. I don't refer to this as an emergency because that has a different connotation in the council setting. But it is a matter of some urgency to the highway superintendent, who believes that he absolutely needs to get the drainage replaced on about 1,900 feet of Flag Street, and the cost of that is somewhere north of $380,000. We've also built into this request the engineering that we know we're going to have to do on Flag Street. Flag Street is what they refer to as a country road, so it needs to be surveyed, the layout needs to be established, and more formalized drainage has to be engineered so that the proper drainage is in the proper location with easements that are properly owned by the town. And I can tell you that right now, as many roads in town and in many towns are, the drainage has been installed probably at a time when the road wasn't at all populated with homes. There are outlets on private property, and a lot of those things need to be cleaned up and done properly. So there is engineering built into this amount in order to cover that as well.
Is there anybody here from the public that has any general questions? Anybody here from the public that has any general questions regarding this order? Anybody here from the public wishing to speak in favor of this order? Anybody here from the public wishing to speak in favor? Anyone here from the public wishing to speak in opposition to this order? Anybody here wishing to speak in opposition to this order? Seeing none, we'll open it up to any questions from the councilors. Councilor Chase.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just like to extend thanks to the town manager for the proper response to the need for remediation of this problem. And I certainly think it's going to be extremely beneficial to have this dealt with now rather than await some more serious condition to come. So that's it. I would just like to say thank you for the prompt attention to it.
Mr. George?
Thank you. Through you to the town manager. So, Mr. Dutton, with this, if this is approved, I know that there is a plan out there for improvements and projects and things of that nature. Is this going to have a trickle effect in regards to other roadway work that needs to be done? I mean, I'm going to go on the assumption that we really technically didn't budget $500,000 for Flag Street during the budget process. So is this going to delay other projects? And if so, what will those be?
I guess the short answer is I don't anticipate it delaying other projects necessarily. We do plan on going out to bid on engineering, road engineering. Obviously for this will be the first one, but our request for qualifications or our request for proposals will be based upon sort of a laundry list of different roads that we know we have to address. So we'll ask for prices and for specific areas, specific packages of roads, and we'll get prices, proposals based on that. So we will plow ahead with the engineering that we need, certainly for Flag Street first, because that seems to be the most urgent. We know we have similar issues with portions of South Street, Vernon Street, and I think as many of you folks know, there are some smaller projects in neighborhoods that require engineering and then ultimately capital improvement funds. So I can't say that it's going. This in particular will delay other projects just yet, but I can say that this certainly needs to be done.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Mr. Columbotus?
Mr. Dutton, can you explain why we wouldn't take this out of the capital improvement fund? Why do you choose to take it directly from the capital fund stabilization?
Because that's where we store our capital funds essentially in capital stabilization.
Okay. Right.
I probably use those terms interchangeably, but
okay.
They're really the same thing.
Consistent with our declaration as a town that follows principles of complete streets, which is, to accommodate multi-modes of transportation, what provisions for sidewalks and bicycling will be made on this section of roadway?
That will, we do, you are absolutely correct, we do follow principles of complete streets, and we've committed to doing that in order to receive state aid. So we will do the same here. That will be part of the design process when the engineer gets on board.
All right, thank
and
you.
The engineer will know and will bid on the project knowing that we're a complete streets community.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Mr. Dunn, I have a couple questions regarding this. And when we first saw the video of the robot under the ground, to me, at that point, it was explained, or it was shown to us, and I don't think any of us, particularly me, we have to take the word for who was down there and who's really looking at this, that there was some rotting or deterioration inside that drainage that needed to be addressed. And I'm sure that robot's continuing going around town now and looking at other hot spots as well, because I'm sure there's a lot of them. But this order, to me, now, it's now gone on to almost a whole, now we're going to almost do this like we're doing Elm Street. And I don't know how it got to that level when it was the first approach, because the street itself is not that bad of a street. It's pretty smooth, it's pretty new, except the drainage wasn't probably taken care of when it was opened up then. So, and now you're talking sidewalks. That wasn't, when we're talking a whole new road. I just don't think that was explained in the beginning when we need this. And we had a consultant that came in and did a whole evaluation of all of our roads, and Flag Street was not even on the radar screen. And now we're going to spend $500,000 plus, because you're going to come back for more money. I just don't know what other, we don't know what kind of other scenarios like this are out there, which could wipe us out in a heartbeat of all the money that the effort that has been made to put into stabilization. So I don't know if we received any additional money from the state regarding Chapter 70 funds, because I know the state appropriated additional monies above for Chapter 70. I don't know what benefit we reap from that additional amount. But I'm hoping that future emergencies, so to speak, like this, don't eat up our stabilization, that we can use Chapter 70 monies the best we can for this. And yeah, there might be some emergencies that we might need to use this money for on the roads, but this has now become almost like a complete renovation of Flag Street. When it was initially proposed to us, there was a problem with the drainage, and we just needed to get down there and fix that. So that's just my comment. That's what I observe.
And I guess my only, I apologize if the process, I didn't explain the process very well, but ultimately, replacing, if we could replace just the drainage pieces, without ripping the entire street up, absolutely, we would do that. But I did want to point out, and I think I explained this to probably the Finance Committee or Budget and Finance or both, we are looking, I certainly don't want to spend money certainly in any way that doesn't require that we spend money. So what we would do with this appropriation at the very get-go is hire the engineer who will tell us exactly what we do need to do, and the best way to go about it, and the least costly way to go about doing the best job that we can do. So we're not planning on just going out and, because we have money, and spending it. I look at myself as sort of the pinch point in the hourglass. We're going to very methodically look at exactly what we have to do on that street. And quite honestly, if we determine that for some reason we were way off base, or the highway superintendent determines that he misjudged it, we'll stop right there. We won't continue with Flag Street. We've got enough other issues that we know we have to contend with. But we're fairly certain that Flag Street is one that requires at least a complete drainage replacement.
So then this appropriation is simply just for the study? There will be absolutely no work related to this money?
Oh, no.
Okay.
No, we're anticipating, we know when you go out and you look for, obviously we have to base a transfer on some kind of quantifiable. So we've gone out and we've asked contractors that do this all the time to give us rough estimates on what it would cost to replace the existing drainage over that 1,900 feet of line that we know we have to fix. And so we've got that figure. We also know what the cost is going to be, the rough cost is going to be on engineering, and we also know what the rough cost is going to be on securing easements from the abutters along the way where we need to route water. So that all lumped together is what the $500,000 figure is.
Is it possible, though, that well, in the future, when additional money is needed, because it certainly sounds like additional money is going to be needed, that some of that could be used from Chapter 70 or additional state aid, or are you thinking it's all going to have to come out of capital?
I think right now, that's going to be a broader discussion in front of the council. We use our Chapter 90 funds in multiple different areas. And what we're trying to do is use Chapter 90 funds for the reasons that they're granted us to maintain the road system. We're trying not to use them, and if we do that, well, I guess the bottom line is we don't have nearly enough budgeted money to add to Chapter 90 to even begin to cover our entire road system. So what we're trying to do is focus Chapter 90 funds on maintenance of the existing roads, and where we know we've got to rebuild roads, look for alternative funding to do that. Capital stabilization fund is one of those areas that we're looking at to be able to fund complete rebuilding of the roads. So we're trying, and traditionally Bridgewater has done, any road work has always come under Chapter 90. We're trying to sort of make sure that we use Chapter 90 to maintain the roads, as many roads as we can in good order. In cases where we've got major rebuilding, we're trying to look for alternative funding mechanisms there.
Mr. Columbotus?
So what, so this $500,000, presumably when you dig up drainage, you're going to need to redo the road on top of it, right? Mm-hmm. So what other work exactly? So the road substrate and top layer and curbing, sidewalks. What else? What other funding will we need to finish this 1,900-foot section of roadway?
That's probably about it. When we get a price on replacing the drainage, that price includes patching. So, okay. Generally, as I've explained before, we patch a road, and it lives with a patch for a period of time, ideally over a winter season, so that the rain and the traffic actually works to settle the excavation, and that's what you want. You want everything to settle, so that when you come back and you put a top coat on the however you're doing it, with your grinding and paving, then what you're putting on as a final coat is not going to settle further, which happens frequently if you don't compress it well enough. So what would this not pay for? It probably would not pay for the either the grinding and paving if that road does not have a sufficient enough base to it, which is the amount of material underneath the pavement. If it doesn't have sufficient base, then all of the pavement would have to come up, and you'd have to excavate out some of however many inches of base, put down a better base, and roll that. That's where the expensive piece comes in. If we install the drainage and we simply have to fill and then patch and then come back in the spring and do a grind a layer off the top and then repave, then that's a much more manageable process, and that's something that probably could be managed out of Chapter 90 funds.
Do you find that it seems like these sorts of instances have popped up where we haven't done good infrastructure work? At the bridge at Bridge Street, we kind of did stuff on the cheap, and it seems like that's the legacy of that is coming back to bite us, where if we don't do it right now, we're going to be doing it, if we do a halfway job now, we'll end up doing it again in 5 or 10 years. And so what you're endeavoring to do is do it right, get the drainage right, so that the long-term stability of the rate of the road is maintained, right?
I think right? Generally, absolutely. I often tell the department heads, if we're not going to do it right, we're not going to do it at all. In this case, even if we don't do it completely right, we still need to do it because it's a public safety issue. But I think your point is a good one. I think historically, we've tried to do things cost effectively. There are probably times when Bridgewater thought that they found a cheap way to do it, and fast forward a couple of decades, and it ends up really costing us a lot more. I can think of a school in that boat.
Right, so we're trying to avoid that. Yep. Thank you.
Mr. Fitzgibbons, yeah.
I'm just doing some math in my head, so I may be off a little bit, but this is essentially 2,000 feet of road for $500,000, which gives me a cost of $250 per foot, which I then extrapolate out to 5,000 feet in a mile, which is $1.2 million per mile that we're going to have to deal with. Is there any estimate from the highway department or anybody about the actual, because there are other issues exactly as big as this that we just haven't found yet, to Mr. Gallagher's point earlier on. That's a huge number, and we need to get in front of that sooner rather than later, because it's $1.2 million per mile. And how many miles of roads do we have in the town? Over 30?
138.
Yeah, 138, yeah. So it's not everywhere, but if it's 10%, that's 13 times 1.2 million, which is somewhere around $15 million. So just thinking out loud.
If it's puts your mind at ease at all, the highway department and the finance department are working right now on capturing as much information as we know about and translating that into a work plan.
Thank you.
And obviously, that would come to the council.
Mr. Columbotus?
Is it Westford and Sampson? Was that the consultant we hired 3, 4, 5 years ago to do an overall assessment of our roadways and prioritize? Did that prioritize roads to
So
work on?
the president pointed this out. We hired Weston and Sampson. It was actually about, I think it was more like 10 years ago.
Thanks for nothing.
But we have worked away at that priority list. We have made some good progress on that. We had Street Scan come in, give us a tool that we will continue to use, and it focuses on pavement, the pavement condition of both sidewalks and roadways. Unfortunately, the one thing that it can't tell us is what's underneath the road, and Flag Street is in beautiful shape on the surface. I drove down it the other day, and for the most part is in beautiful shape. But this issue, unfortunately, lurks beneath. So we don't, when we do, we've done now a number of drainage replacements, but before Ron does any significant work on the surface of a street, he makes sure, if there is formalized drainage, which this is, he'll make sure that we're not just putting, a nice Band-Aid over the top of the road, and having a severed artery underneath.
Any other questions? I will now, Mr. Wood?
So, having lived through this for a long time now, so you're only worried about the drainage under the road, but what do the water lines look like under there too?
And that's, engineering will tell us that. So if anytime we do a street, we look at drainage, and I should have added in water and sewer lines as well. So, well taken.
Thanks.
Okay, I will now close the public hearing at 8:23 PM. I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve?
Second.
There's a motion to approve and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, this does require a roll call vote and requires 2/3 of the full council, or 6 yeses.
Mr. Fitzgibbons?
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus?
Yes.
Mr. Rushton?
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. George?
Yes.
Mr. Wood?
Yes.
Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Souza?
Yes.
8 in favor, none against.
Okay, that ends The hearings for this evening, license transactions under G, petition P 2019-025, new common victor's license, K&A Enterprises LLC doing business as Honeydew, 1485 Pleasant Street. This requires a voice vote.
Motion to approve?
Second.
There's a motion, there's a second to approve the petition. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. George.
Through you to Mr. Dutton. So in the notes, the license will be held until DBA is issued, notarized lease is provided, fire inspection completed, and property debts owed are paid. Could you expand on that, please?
All the debts that are owed have been paid,
Okay.
and it was inspected today, and all debts have been paid.
Notarized lease and DBA?
And we have the lease. We have the lease. And,
And in all honesty, I'm not worried about the DBA.
yeah.
But
believe
we have the lease,
Yep.
fire inspection's been done, and all the debts have been paid.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And again, to please the council, we definitely don't release a license until all the, any debts that are owed the town certainly are paid.
Thank you.
Any other questions? There is a motion and there's a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Petition is passed. Petition P 2019-026, change in officer and change of beneficial interest, the 99 Restaurants of Boston LLC. I'll entertain a motion to approve the petition.
Second.
There's a motion and there's a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Petition passes. No presentations this evening. We'll move on to the town manager's report. On to A, updates, Broad Street. A lot of graffiti on those buildings on Broad Street.
Got a lot of things to go over tonight. So Broad Street, I think last meeting, we had made some overtures to the developer, but we had received a verbal promise from him to submit, that he was days away from submitting an application to the planning board for his project. Since then, we have not heard anything. The building inspector did talk to him, and he did put a little bit of work into cleaning up some of the trees and overgrown stuff that was on his property. And that is where we stand. To be clear, we are, and I think Councilor George pointed this out last time, we are waiting on him to submit his plan to the planning board, and we've made, obviously the council knows, we've made zoning changes, we've negotiated most of the developer's agreement, and we're really just waiting for a submission or waiting for an application to get in front of the planning board at this point. So I don't know that there's anything else we can really do to encourage that, so.
Mr. George?
Through you to the town manager. So I think we also discussed having the building inspector go on the property. We've got some buildings there. My understanding is we don't need to get permission from the building owner if we feel that there are unsafe conditions. Has the building inspector gone in yet?
He has visited the site, so you can call a board of engineers to review the property, and if it's dangerous, you can order it torn down, and that is generally in extreme cases, and I don't know that he's found anything inherently dangerous with those properties in their current state. They're extremely unsightly, and still, as far as I'm concerned, remain a mess, but I don't know that he would be able to find anything that rises to the level of danger that justifies the demolition of the buildings.
So do we know when was the last time the building inspector was in the building that was formerly the bowling alley? Or what, I forget, whatever it was. To the left, Friendly's is a little bit of a different scenario for the mere fact that that has not been abandoned close to that other building, When was the last time the building inspector was in there?
I don't know the answer. I can find out.
So
But I'll find out.
Yeah, I think where I'm going with this, Mr. Dutton, is now I've shifted from my impatience with the developer on giving us a plan, promising us everything, not delivering on almost everything. The townspeople are now blaming the town that they think we're getting in the way of him doing anything, which we're not. And now I'm very concerned, also to, Councilor Gallagher's point, now that's becoming a little bit of a target for vandalism. And I don't know when the last time the building inspector was in the building to do an inspection. You can do an outside visual inspection, but there could be some major structural issues inside that can compel us to move because of safety issues. So I think we're at the point now where you said earlier on, it's an extreme measure. I think we're at an extreme time right now. And all I'm looking at is to make sure that we have buildings that aren't going to be a safety issue in the near future. And I think just from a practical perspective of that building being vacant for probably close to 20 years and having very little oversight or anything done to it, I think we have the right and the obligation to get in there with the engineers and do an assessment to see if we need to do anything proactively. Thank you.
I think that's a good point. I appreciate it.
Anyone else comments on Broad Street? Mr. Columbotus?
I believe at our last meeting, Mr. Dutton, you mentioned invoking our vacant and abandoned properties ordinance. Has there been any movement on? So we offered a carrot to that property owner by changing our zoning to make it a more attractive place to invest, and so that hasn't proven effective yet. So perhaps now it's time for the stick, which is a somewhat punitive measure to urge development. So can you address that?
I'm more than happy to use the stick. He was called into the building official's office, and they read through the vacant and abandoned building ordinance. And that is probably why you saw a little bit of action on that street. But I will follow up with Mr. Solari and see where that stands as well.
Thank you.
So,
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Mr. Wood. Yeah.
Interesting discussion, because we're asking someone to spend multi-million dollars to develop property and trying to force him to spend multi-million dollars. So, a couple of questions. Are the taxes current?
I believe last time I checked, which was probably 3 months ago, they were current.
Okay.
I'm not sure if they're current.
So if the building that was formerly known as Friendly's is removed and nothing else is done, how much tax revenue does the town lose from negative growth?
You would lose the assessed value of the structure, which I could look up.
But there would be a loss if the developer decides to remove that building to avoid, having to deal with it. Thank you.
The other point that I'd like to bring out, I think it's kind of interesting, is I believe that Mr. Pastel was in here 2 years ago with a somewhat of a plan of what he'd like to do to Broad Street. Well, I was on the town website and printed out a few pages of the downtown revitalization report from 2014. And on page 51 of that report, it quotes him, and it's according to an article, it says that, according to an article by Rebecca Hyman on October 8th, 2013, developer Jim Pascal has proposed a friendly 40B project that would be, quote, an engine to help drive downtown revitalization. 7 years ago. Even though he was just, it seems like, I think Friendly's was still open then, or the other restaurant, the bowling alley, was definitely closed then, so. I don't know what he wants to do with the property, but in the meantime, it should look at least somewhat presentable or with little dignity to the taxpayers of Bridgewater, when they drive by, and all the graffiti that's on there is a plight, and we've had it cleaned off before, so. I just thought that was interesting that I bumped into that reading through that report. And thought I'd share that. Anyway, anybody else on Broad Street? Okay, let's move to North Street.
North Street. The building inspector has gone out there. I haven't heard back from him. I believe he went out there the end of last week or yesterday, looking to enforce the removal of tractor-trailer parking, which is not permitted on the property. The status of some of the other complaints, I think there's a complaint that it's being used for a logging or a firewood cutting operation in a residential district, and also a store, contractor yard for materials is another complaint, and we are reviewing those complaints. It's a little unclear in light of the existing right to farm ordinance, whether that is permissible or not. So I've spoken a little bit with Councilor Sousa about possible amendments to the right to farm, and we're working on drafting those. And if all goes well, then we'll probably see those at your next council meeting. So
That's not going to be a bill of attainder, is it?
no,
Okay.
no, can't be.
I know it can't be.
Anyone else have any questions about North Street? Okay, we'll move on to
Rainbow's End.
Flag Street. No.
Oh, I'm
Back to, I'm sorry. Rainbow's End is on Flag Street.
good point.
Big night for Flag Street.
Rainbow's End, Counselor Chase put this on the agenda, so.
I don't have a whole lot of new news to report. The engineering firm has not yet tested, which I think is a sign of how busy pretty much all the engineering firms are. So I'm not going to make any promises on the schedule. I've thought that I could make a promise on the schedule, but I don't think that's a wise thing to do. So the firm, I'm waiting to get a firm date from the engineering firm right now. In terms of future uses, I think we had talked a little bit about the confusion, a lot of confusion about who had actual control of the property. I'm still not clear, and I don't know that we will resolve that. If the testing comes back that we can remediate, successfully remediate the area, and Parks and Rec Commission comes back as wanting to look at that property for an upgraded, either an upgraded playground or another use, then we'll engage in a conversation with Bridgewater Youth Soccer and also the DOC in order to provide sort of a roadmap of how we move forward in developing some alternative use for that property, if that's appropriate. So right now, really, we're just waiting on test results. And as I say, I don't think we'll ever get to a true resolution to the ownership and control of the property. Well, we know the ownership, but the control of the property. But I do think that the best way to resolve that is just put the parties at the table when we decide what we want to do with it. Because once we do that, then we can get agreement that'll be very clear. So that's about all I have on Rainbow's End.
Anyone else, questions? Yep.
If I could, I think then just to confirm, my understanding is that if in fact the soil test sample demonstrates that remediation, I'll call it, could take place just, for example, by removal of a certain limited amount of soil, presumably that would be one of the answers we'd receive. And were we to authorize that? I guess my first question is, would we be in a position to actually then authorize someone to remove the soil, and how was that paid for?
That's, that's exactly when we get Bridgewater Youth Soccer and the DOC to sit down. My experience with the DOC is that they're fairly amenable to helping. In fact, they've been quite helpful throughout, but that would be a conversation we'd have with them. If there's any soil in there that has to be remediated, that's going to have we're going to have sit down and have that discussion with them.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Happy to have some help when we have that discussion.
Anything else on Rainbow's End? Moving on to heavy truck engine braking ordinance. Counselor Chase.
We have looked into this. We have found a fair handful of towns that have implemented some kind of ordinance. We've also found a number of towns who have just put up signs. We've also found a number of residents in towns that just put up signs on their own. So there's a little bit of a smattering of approaches there. But point is that we have seen ordinances and bylaws adopted in towns. I've reached out to, I think as I've explained at prior meetings, my understanding is, and based on my conversations with the police chief and the highway superintendent, my belief has been that there's no legal authority behind those ordinances or certainly the signs. But we have reached out to Mass DOT to clarify the legality of ordinances and bylaws and signs themselves. And they've put together a team for us, so we are planning on meeting with them probably down in District 5 in Taunton, hopefully within the next couple of weeks. But certainly if there are restrictions that are permissible, we'll work with Councilor Chase and any other councilor that would like to sponsor, some legislation to affect some kind of limits on the jake brake, because that's what it is. It's colloquially called a jake brake, but it's an engine braking system.
And this is concurring on Conant?
Specifically, Flag Street.
Well, when you start ripping it up, they'll go a little slower, won't they?
But it might be louder braking. But we've had some complaints in pockets around town, and so I'll be very intrigued to see what Mass DOT has to say, because as I say, it's not just us. This issue exists statewide. One small reminder, though, that the highway superintendent reminded me of. Jake brakes are a safety device in tractor trailers, and they are designed to generally slow down a loaded truck in a way that the air brakes or the hydraulic brakes cannot. So we want to be sensitive to that, at least moving forward, so that we don't create a safety issue somewhere just because of that. But it is hopefully an item that we can move on in some form or another. So that is what I have on that one.
Anything else on heavy truck engine braking? Moving on to update on the town manager goals.
So very quickly, just a little update on the fire station. I think that comes up again later, but I'll give it to you now. I have formed a building committee, and we are almost completed forming that committee, and I hope to have an initial meeting before Thanksgiving. It's always nice to try to get it before Thanksgiving, because after Thanksgiving, people sort of go their separate ways for a little while. We have a request for qualifications for the feasibility study ready to be released, and we'll probably time that so that it's due a few weeks after, or a few weeks into January at the very least. Again, for the same reason, because people aren't necessarily watching what's coming down the pike. So we want to make sure we capture as many requests or as many responses to the request for qualifications as possible. The Memorial Building, the CPC application's been filed with the Community Preservation Committee. We're currently working on answering a number of questions the committee had, and we're also trying to schedule a joint meeting with the Community Preservation Committee and the Historic District Commission to review the details of the plan. We need, as you may know, we need Historic District Commission approval, certainly for the exterior plan of the building. We've met with a number of them individually. They seem to really like what the architect is proposing, and so that I'm trusting will go relatively smoothly. And once the Community Preservation Committee makes a recommendation, then obviously that comes back to you for appropriation. So that is, and for those that don't know, what we're proposing with the Memorial Building is historic renovation. So you won't notice any substantial change. You'll notice a cleaning up of the outside of the building, a reworking of the existing windows, better, more appropriate storm windows on the outside, but other than that, you'll notice pretty much just sort of some good upkeep and improvements on the exterior of the actual building. One of the dramatic changes, which I was fearful would destroy the historic look of the building, is the creation of a walkway up to the front door to make the front of the building handicapped accessible, which is now required under new ADA regulations and Massachusetts regulations. So that the architect was able to accomplish that and make it look actually great. So I'm very pleased with the look of that building, and obviously we'll make a short presentation to the council when the time comes for that as well. So that's what I had on the Memorial Building. The regional agreement, one of my goals was to make sure that we walk through the regional agreement amendment successfully, and we've had no action on that, no meetings on that. Recently, did reach out to the superintendent this afternoon and our counterparts in Rainham to just find out if we can schedule something now that we've resolved some of our big school issues in Bridgewater. Mitchell School, not really any update on that since last week. Elm Street, construction is well underway. I think anybody that's been up there has told me that it's a pretty, well, it's a mess, but it's pretty impressive. We'll end up with a great project. The DeBartolo building is also well underway, and that is moving along very rapidly. The only thing that right now we see on the horizon that may affect our road reconstruction is Columbia Gas. The state has shut down new installations for Columbia Gas, so we have to go through a little bit of a process in order to look for a waiver for Columbia Gas to finish their engineering and then installation of the gas extension, and that we're hoping won't affect the schedule too much. The contractor, our contractor for Elm Street, is actually ahead of schedule, which is good news. Broad Street, I think I've mentioned Broad Street prior. Grant funding, one of the items on my list was to continue to seek grant funding. And just to give you a little flavor of what we're doing in those terms, we learned yesterday, or end of last week, I guess it was, that we had secured funding, a little bit of funding for cybersecurity threat training and through the Executive Office of Technology Services and Security. That's actually one of the very few grants, there are a couple on this list, one of the very few grants that offsets an expense operational expense that we would have had to incur. Cybersecurity, for those that are involved, is pretty serious issue right now, especially with municipalities. We get a lot of reports of municipalities an employee in a municipality opening up an email, opening up an attachment that then hijacks all their networks and then seeks a ransom, which many cities and towns have actually paid. So we don't want to be in that position. Obviously, Stiles and Hart grant I've mentioned before, from the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, another one from them for state revolving fund money for water and sewer, complete streets. We are currently looking to complete streets program for sidewalks and crosswalks and bump outs on on Main Street. We're a couple of different grant opportunities through the governor's office for technical assistance. We've also applied for technology grant funding that will allow us to extend our fiber network to the town buildings that currently don't have it. Also allow us to extend fiber network to the new water treatment plant in order to make reporting seamless there. NOAA and Executive Office of Environmental Affairs for High Street Bridge redesign. That's not one that we've necessarily applied for, but we're so far the beneficiaries of. Executive Office of Housing and Community Development, we've got a housing choice grant, and we're seeking to use that money to replace and loop water mains over on Curve Street. So got a Homeland Security grant application in. We've got a Community Compact grant for zoning implementation. Mass Disabilities Commission, we received a grant to do townwide disabilities assessment that will be beginning soon. And then the Executive Office of Elder Affairs for capital and operations grants. So that's just gives you a little flavor, probably missing a few, but it gives you a little bit of a flavor of the kinds of grants that we consistently try to go seek. So I mentioned probably well over a year ago that this, my focus, because we had gotten to a good place financially, my focus is shifting to try to go after these grants and specifically in areas where we know we can make a substantial impact, both community development-wise and economic development-wise, and also be able to provide taxpayer services at the same cost or ideally some reduced cost. So that is kind of where we are in the grants. Leveraging technology was another item that I'll just touch on. We are doing a soft rollout now. You can go on the website and look up the permitting guide, plug your address in there, and it'll walk you through what kind of permits you will need and what kind of board approvals you will need. So if you go on to the Community and Economic Development page, there's a link there, and I think the IT director is in the process of adding the link to the building officials page and other pages so that it's easily accessible. So we're doing that. We've got online licensing module getting ready for a rollout. We've scheduled for a website redesign in March, planning and zoning, permitting process module. We have engaged OpenGov with a goal of ultimately probably 2021 goal of getting open checkbook so people can log on and look at exactly where we spend our money down to the check number and the penny. Right now, we're testing out OpenGov with projects, and Elm Street will be the first project that we use to sort of test out the capabilities of OpenGov. Also, on very long-term technology project is electronic document storage, and then also implementation of GIS for resident use. So those are some of the initiatives there. Let's see, downtown revitalization document. I think Councilor Wood was interested in knowing more about parallel parking. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I do want to let the council know we just received a draft copy of our roadway safety audit And that is being reviewed internally by us as well as Mass DOT staff that attended the actual audit, day-long audit. The RSA, the road safety audit, is actually informed by we collected all of the studies that have been done over the years, including there was a 2014 Cecil Group study, which was Nelson Nygaard, and the Cecil Group was for the downtown revitalization plan. A component of that was relative to the downtown traffic patterns, downtown parking, as well as there was a 2014 OCPC parking, bicycle, pedestrian, and traffic operations improvement plan. Certainly those two and all of the other studies went into the road safety audit review, and so I've got it here. It makes a number of recommendations, one of which is adopting parallel parking throughout Central Square rather than angled parking, and they identify, whether it's a high safety, if there's basically some urgency, if the safety urgency is high, medium, or low, it labeled parallel parking to be medium in terms of urgency. I'm sure I'm using the wrong term, but it is in there, as well as the conceptual notion of creating two-way traffic on one side of the common, and then parking or pedestrian-oriented area on the opposite side of the common, which was a recommendation of the 2014 Nelson Nygaard study. So the benefit, just sort of off script, I guess, a little bit, the benefit of the road safety audit is that it allows us to benefit from federal highway safety improvement program funding, and it takes a little longer, but the payback, I'm led to believe, is much more substantial for waiting a little bit longer to go through the road safety audit program. So if we can get to a point where we've got a plan, and the federal government is willing, and through the state government is willing to fund that plan, then ultimately that's good for Bridgewater. So that's, I don't know if I addressed the parallel parking other than to say it is in both the studies that were done in 2014 as well as the people falling asleep.
Yes.
Yeah. Everywhere.
I thought we got them with OPEB.
I think if I can ask a question on that one.
Can you?
Can I?
Sure.
It's up to you.
Sure.
Okay, awesome. I think I saw that context as part of probably an overall submission, maybe for some additional grant money or something like that as well. That was the main interest. Okay. Because if we received, funding or something else, will we kind of be forced into parallel parking? And then I think you did a good had a good explanation of how it fits in with the rest of the potential planning, not planning, but potential planning that we might go through over the next couple of years.
I think that's a good point. I think the and as I say, I haven't read through it completely yet, but I think most of the recommendations that are generated by the road safety audit are designed to give us talking points with MassDOT so that we can better, and the engineers obviously, so we can better refine the plan that really sort of accommodates Bridgewater's needs. So one of the options, it's not, it is a recommendation, but it's not anything other than that, is parallel parking. So absolutely. So that is the parallel parking piece. I think Councilor Columbotus was curious about Mass Cultural Grant Award and implementation. We received the grant notification back in May or June. We are still awaiting the state contract. For every grant that you receive from the state, you then receive a follow-up contract. You can't expend the money that you haven't contracted for yet. So we need to sign that contract as soon as we get it prior to spending it. But the RFQ for a consultant to do the feasibility work on Town Hall is ready to go, and that'll be released as soon as we sign, as soon as we receive and then sign the contract for the grant funding. Was that? Relocation of the fire station, I mentioned before, prior item, we've seated almost all the members of the committee. I think we have roughly 10, 12, and I'm hoping to have that meeting prior to Thanksgiving so that we can get on the ball with planning for a future fire station. And just as a reminder, the reason I'm sort of on a fast track there is that fire station, the Fire Station 1 sits within our federal opportunity zone, so it should be a fairly desirable spot for redevelopment, and the fire station is not now, nor will be, the highest and best use of that property. And I think ongoing traffic assessment project, I think I mentioned most of that as it pertains to Central Square. The only other piece I would mention is the highway safety audit. You have to qualify for that. So in order to qualify, you unfortunately have to have a number of accidents. And we've had enough accidents to trigger the safety audit. So the corner of Bedford Street and Grove, we've had multiple accidents, so that's part of the results, the draft that I've got to go through, as well as Ron and Jennifer. So we'll look at that, and as well as the engineers. And if anybody wants a copy, I'm happy to share it. So that is what I have on that. And then my sister and I, we are aware, obviously, that my sister and I closed. Our understanding is, and we don't have confirmation of it, but our understanding is that there's another food service restaurant-type business proposing to go in there, but we see the signs, but we haven't seen any applications here yet, so.
On my sister and I don't know the reason, the reason that I've heard that the current the restaurant my sister and I closed was because the change of ownership and the owner of the building increased the rent to a level that the sister and I said, I can't do this anymore. Is that pretty much what you heard, or is there more?
I've heard that. Actually, I heard that, I want to say it was probably 4 years ago when it changed hands.
The only comment that I'll make regarding that is sometimes long-standing businesses like that, particularly a small mom-and-pop breakfast restaurant like that that's been around for a while, usually people get older and they want to retire and they just had enough. So I don't know if that is the case, but if the case was that the rent was going up too high for them, I understand capitalism and people have a right to do what they want with their businesses and so forth, but it would have been nice if we intersected, our community and economic development director could have gone down there to see if there's any way we can keep this business open and let them, they're providing a good thing, it's a community thing and all that. If it's all about the money, then they left. It would have been a shame if we lost this business to, another, tattoo parlor or a ear piercing place or something like that. When if we had interceded to try to do something to work things out, if that was the case.
I'd just add that tattoo parlors and ear piercing places also serve the community and the people who want to use them. And some people like breakfast, some people like tattoos.
People want to eat breakfast, though.
So it's a good, another lesson in taxes. Just because the storefront is vacant doesn't mean that the property tax of the overall building is going to drop a lot. It may drop a little bit, over time, but obviously not. Other communities have tried rent control unsuccessfully, and I wouldn't want to get into that business in Bridgewater, but obviously interesting concepts. But it's unfortunately, it's a well-established business that a lot of people went to, and some businesses can't survive 100 years, and some can't survive 50 years, and, we move on. Hopefully it's not vacant, and hopefully it adds to whatever goes in there adds to the benefit of downtown.
Mr. Columbotus?
So the building that houses my sister and I is also in the Opportunity Zone, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this where property owners think their property is worth a whole lot more than it is, and we've seen an empty storefront on the west side of the common in that new brick building for 15 years. Vacant buildings are unfortunate, so perhaps it might make sense for you to, I'm not sure if the owner of that building is even aware of the Opportunity Zone and the opportunity that affords, and it's one thing to triple your rent when you're making a whole lot of improvements. It's another to triple it and not do anything. So I hope it's the former. That it'd be great if that owner saw fit to invest in that property and bring it up to a point where it provides a real resource for renters. So.
Very good. Mr. George?
Through you to the town manager. So if I could go back to the regional agreement, and we've been talking about this for a long time. Have we determined who from each town is going to sit in for that group to start diving into the regional agreement? I don't know where we landed on that.
We did. Both towns decided to appoint one member, town manager in each town appointed one member of the selectmen, or in our case, council, one member of and one member of the finance committee. So Eric Langone and Tim Fitzgibbons are our representatives.
Okay.
Is that it?
That is it?
That covers all the other subjects, right?
I think so.
B, C, D, E, and F. So we'll move on to discussions.
Well, actually, for the next meeting, could I add?
Oh, sure. Yep. Sorry.
The discussion we had on parking permit ordinance, can I get an update on that for the next meeting?
Yes.
Does anybody else want to add anything under town manager for our next meeting in 2 weeks? If not, if you think of something, there's still plenty of time to call Ann and let her know you would like something on there prior to the agenda being released. Discussions under item J, town manager annual review. Councilor George.
Yes, so Council Loesch isn't here, so I'm going to sit in for her. We've got the goals and objectives. The one thing that we want to ask the councilors to do is to start thinking about how each of you want to give input on the town manager's review. Don't have to do that right here. We can solicit that from, if you can go through Ann in regards to how you want to do that. We're going to start Mr. Dutton's review in December and have an ongoing report in January. So just wanted to put that out there for people in regards to how we're going to, basically take input from 9 people. We want everyone to do it in the same format. We need to collectively figure out how we're going to do it. So I don't know if there's any questions on that per se. You're all on notice.
Okay. Anybody have any thoughts? Just shoot an email to Ann, and she'll get it to Sean and the committee. Possible charter changes, finance committee membership, town manager?
I thought it was worth, given some of the discussions that have happened over the past few months, I thought it was probably a good time to at least put this on for a discussion, not to prolong it, but maybe just I'll introduce the notion and you can think about it. We've had some challenges trying to find people for the finance committee, appointees for the finance committee, both the town clerk, council, and myself. And so we were thinking about it internally about what might make some changes. Finance Committee has actually just created a finance subcommittee for budget purposes, for budget discussions. So it got us thinking that, what might work better, I mean, I realize the charter creates the finance committee and identifies the membership and it identifies how they're appointed, and that's all fine, but if we were to make a change, it would require a charter change that obviously the council would vote, it'd have to go to the legislature, but it may be one of those areas where we pick off this issue and we decide that we want to make some changes there, and we do it as sort of the standalone. We're not trying to change every piece of the charter, we're just trying to change this one piece. So my suggestion is that, councilors think about it, that we may decide not to make any change at all. And just to throw out an idea, you may want to make it a 3-member committee, or you may want to make it a 5-member committee. I do think 9 is a challenging number on a committee because, the temptation when you sit on a 9, present company excluded, when you sit on a 9-member committee, there's always a temptation to say, I'm not needed tonight, I don't need to show up. But if you had to go to the other extreme, if you had a 3-member committee, I think you might find more engagement there. But just a thought, and I just throw it out there for discussion.
Mr. Fitzgibbons?
I think it's a worthwhile thought, and I'd suggest the Rules and Procedures Committee take it up as a discussion item at one of their meetings, and maybe kick it around with the town manager and the Finance Committee themselves, invite them in, and maybe come back with some legislation for action at some point.
Sure. Yeah.
Good suggestion.
And some of you may be wondering, if I may, because the positions are not elected, the path to change the charter is slightly different than what we tried to do earlier. We can actually promote the item here and send it to the State House, and they can vote on it, and it would take effect, as opposed to having to go through a whole town-wide election.
Yeah, I think that this particular section of the charter does need to be addressed. I mean, because we're heading, I don't think we can get anything accomplished between now and the next budget cycle, but it would be nice if, they had a full complement and weren't having to, and I understand people's schedules and work and all that, and sometimes they can't make meetings and they put a lot of things off, but reducing it to 5, to me, sounds like it might make better sense. I wouldn't want to go any lower. But I think sending it to Rules and Procedures, seeing if something could come out of there would be a good idea. In addition, I think in January, we have to have the discussion of revamping the whole charter committee again, too, to do the next round of changes. So it's hard during the budget process, as you're aware of, that when we have orders and things that they need to approve, that we wait. It's held up. Anything else on that? Okay, let's move on to committee reports. Public Safety Committee update. I'll go to them first because they're under A.
Sure, I'll provide a brief update. So we met back in August and then again mid-September. The committee mainly has some just updates from our August meeting regarding some pricing on LED solar stop signs. We're waiting on those currently from Highway. We had a discussion back in August about the intersection of Grove and Bedford and some ideas about trying to mitigate the amount of accidents over there. According to the town manager, that has been included in the highway safety audit that was just discussed previously. There's also been some discussions with BSU about opening up the curb cut on Park Ave at the campus center for the loading dock to keep the tractor trailers from continuing down Park Ave. We discussed at the neighborhood's dinner. The town manager's already provided the update with the fire station building committee, so you all have that update. He's also spoken with Charlie from REC about cutting back selectively and very carefully some of the brush at Marathon Park is to not upset neighbors, but also provide some level of safety from the street view. We also discussed the vaping order, but I'll leave that. It's listed as an item in new business unless you want me to discuss it now.
Nope, all set. Anything else? Any other committees reporting tonight? Bill?
Sure. The Budget and Finance Committee met again. You'll see that there's the budget resolution is on here, so this is a good place to
That's right, it's
say.
on that later.
So when we get to that legislation, you'll see, if you recall, that it matches exactly the way we finished up last year, and that was on purpose. And we can discuss more about that, but we had a discussion about the budget resolution. And then the other items, you'll see the notes about the, how we voted on various things for like the capital sewer and things like that.
Okay. Moving on to item L, legislation for action, order FY 20-024, transfer order, capital sewer special purpose transfer. At their meeting held 11/1/19, the Budget and Finance Committee voted 2-0 to recommend approval. The Finance Committee voted 5-0 to recommend approval at their meeting held on 10/28/19. This measure may be finally considered this evening. Entertain a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
There's a motion, there's a second. Any discussion on the motion? This does require a roll call vote.
So 1987, a little bit older piece of equipment,
I don't know why I couldn't have gotten the 33rd or 34th year out of
you
it.
know, a couple more years out of it? Okay.
Roll call vote.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. Wood.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. Rushton.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
8 in favor, none against.
Moving on to order FY 20-028, transfer order, capital transfer FY 20 lease payments. At their meeting held on 10/15/19, the Budget and Finance Committee voted 3-0 to recommend approval. The Finance Committee, at their meeting held on 10/15, Finance Committee, at their meeting held on, I am lost my place here. The Finance Committee voted 5-0 to recommend approval at their meeting held on 10/28/19. This measure may be finally considered this evening
Motion
for
to
approval.
Second.
There's a motion, there's a second to approve. Any discussion? Yep.
I'd just like to ask the town manager, these are leases, so how come we didn't see it in our budget?
Well, I think the finance director is embarking on a process whereby you'll see these as separate orders instead of built into the budget. They're essentially capital purchases spread over a number of years. You've approved it as part of the capital plan, and you've appropriated I think in all these cases, appropriated at least the first year of lease payment. His practice is to maintain in the capital fund balance, always maintain in the capital fund balance enough money to pay for lease payments for the following year.
So essentially, we're trying to decouple lease payments as being capital from operational payments, which would be the budget.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, this does require a roll call vote, and it requires a 2/3 of the council, or 6 yeses.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
Mr. Rushton.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mr. Wood.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
8 in favor, none against.
Moving on to order FY 20-031, Town River Landing Improvements. At their meeting held on 10/25/19, the Community Economic Development Committee voted 3-0 not to recommend approval of this measure. This measure may be finally considered this evening. Where is that one?
Do we have any explanation why they voted it
So I'll
down?
make a motion to approve just for discussion purposes.
I'll second.
Okay.
Mr. Columbotus.
Our committee voted not to recommend because we essentially thought it was premature. We haven't this is kind of determining the future of that whole parcel, whereas we haven't had a more ongoing discussion as to whether this sort of plan makes sense. Perhaps, Mr. Chase, is there anything you might add?
I think that's accurate. That was the general tenor of our
Right.
discussion.
And that this requires a more rigorous discussion, more open process. Perhaps we should appoint a special task force or committee to kind of look into this.
I'll make a motion to postpone this until second meeting in April, first meeting in May.
I'd second that motion.
If I may, the reason is tomorrow night I'll be going to the CPC meeting. We're going to talk about the parcel of land that abuts Bedford Street, Broad Street, and the possibility of acquiring that. That purchase, if it goes forward, will affect how we think about putting this together as a comprehensive plan. So by that point, we should know if we're good to go, not go, maybe get some other insight into what's going on. So that's why I suggest we postpone it.
The other thing that, I mean, I think that the point of bringing this forward was simply because, and I understand the committee, and I'm not opposed to a point. I'd rather postpone it than have it defeated. But we have a report here from 2014, the downtown revitalization plan. It talks about this. It talks about doing something to the Town River Landing and the highway barn and the parcel land. It talks about that. So this report's been sitting on a shelf for 6 years. No one has done anything about it. Nothing. So I made a proposal to try to do something to move it forward, and you said, Mr. Columbotus, that this was, you're jumping the gun or something like that of trying to get something done there. Yes, it should be part of a comprehensive plan. I believe that. But we have to have these things taken off the shelf and look at them and see what we want to do as a council and put orders, resolutions, or whatever to try to implement some of these things. Because by the time it gets down to it, we're going to say this report is too old and we need to do it again. And this is a simple thing. And that whole area of Spring Street is talked about at great length. In addition to Broad Street, which, again, is caught up in, I'm going to submit this and never do, and some other areas. So, I know that there's been some community discussions on the town park system, and there's another one coming up. So hopefully this will all, I'm glad the discussion has been brought to the table, and I'm hoping with what happens tomorrow night, what happens with the meeting with the parklands, and because the Town River Landing is not really part of the parklands, it's a separate thing, but it connects. It'll be a great connection if it ever moves forward. So I'm not opposed to tabling. Mr. Columbotus?
Let me clarify our opposition to this order. I guess we felt that that revitalization plan you referred to had suggested three kind of integrated uses for that parcel. One was commercial, some sort of private commercial development right on Spring Street with some housing behind it, and then a recreational element at the canoe launch. So those are three elements. What this order does is it just takes one of those three elements and says, let's go forward with it without any consideration of how that element would work with the other two. So it just seemed kind of half-baked to us and not comprehensive.
I don't think it's half-baked at all. I mean, the town isn't going to build a building. The town isn't going to build housing, and that's what it calls for. It calls for, the town is not going to do that.
Okay.
The town itself is not going to get into the construction of building homes.
No, we wouldn't do it, but
Right, so
right.
we have a parcel at the end that's called the Town River Landing that can be developed separately. All those things are going to be done separately. Yeah, could they be done together if all the dancing partners get together at the same time? Yes, but we can take care of one piece. We have a piece of legislation next to talk about the highway barn. That's another piece. And then the other parcel's across from the cable studio. So, the town can do their part, but I think the other piece in the study is really more of a private or private-public partnership in a sense of this. So, I think that I don't think it's, I don't know, helter-skelter, is that the word you use? I don't know. what-
Half-baked.
Half-baked, there you go.
Yeah, I guess we thought the three elements should be better coordinated. If we go ahead and engineer
We'll
a
sit there
plan.
for 30 years.
Can I
Wait
finish?
for that, then.
Our thought was if we go ahead and engineer pathways for half of that parcel, and then we've constrained what those other two elements, how they would work.
Totally disagree. Mr. Fitzgibbons?
Okay.
I'd just like to ask Mr. Wood if he would be willing to change his motion a little bit to bring it back in, what's the actual motion? The second meeting of April, the first meeting of May?
I think the first meeting in May.
Okay, and at the same time, referring it back to the Community and Economic Development Committee for further discussion about it?
Yes.
I mean, to the extent.
I'll second that. Yeah, we have-
Okay, no, I just, I want to have a pathway to keep moving forward with it, so, all right, thank you.
Okay, all those in favor of postponing this according to Councilor Wood's motion?
And referring it
And
back
referring
to
it back to the
CEDC.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we'll see that in a few months. Order FY 2003 declaring the highway barn surplus property. At their meeting held on 10/25, the Community Development voted 3-0 to recommend this measure with proposed amendments. This measure may be finally voted on this evening. So the initial request was to declare it surplus property and to direct the town manager to get a cost estimate of turning it down. So I'll refer to Mr. Columbus, but it appears as though that they're taking
Well,
surplus property
I'll
out.
make a motion to approve, just to get it started.
There's a motion on the floor to
second
approve.
that.
There's a second.
I'll make a motion to amend as indicated.
I'll second.
There's a second. Any other?
Then I just have a question for the town attorney before we go further on this.
Sure.
These are pretty significant amendments. Can we just take these up at this point in time? Okay.
Yeah, I believe.
Just wanted to make sure. Thank you. I'll defer to Mr. Columbotus at that point.
I would just say that we saw the notion of paving the cleared area for parking. To pave that area where the highway barn now sits is in direct contradiction to what the revitalization plan said. And in fact, we brought up this very issue with Ms. Burke, Community Economic Development Director, at our meeting. And she agreed that having parking on the street is really not, it's kind of not best practices among, current planning school of thought, and that what's much better is to have a building, to have commercial activity on the street that, especially in a zone where you want to encourage pedestrian travel, that's just a much better use, and to put parking in the back where it's not going to affect the streetscape and it'll improve circulation to do it that way. So that was our rationale for striking that part. And our rationale for striking that first paragraph was that we just need to have a kind of wider angle view of this whole project, and we don't know whether we want to, in fact, declare it surplus property. So it just seems premature to do that. We did agree that it did make sense to raise the building. So we think that makes sense. The building is really just a cinder block structure. It doesn't really offer much potential for reuse, and we thought that it might make the parcel more attractive to a private developer to have that lot cleared. And also, we could even use that for temporary parking in the short term, just gravel, not necessarily pave it, but just gravel parking to meet parking needs in the short term. So those are our reasons for the amendments.
Did the discussion come up as if it's torn down, what the next step would be? I think in order to sell it, we have to declare it surplus. If we want to sell it, we have to declare it surplus property. My understanding. And so we tear it down, it sits there. Okay, now we just have space. And you think people can just park on top of what's left? I mean, without doing any grading or,
There would presumably need to be done some grading or,
okay.
I think it's probably just a cinder block structure. There's no real foundation. There's no basement to the building. Am I right? There's no-
I don't know. I thought there was a tank underground or something. Was there a tank underground there? Was
There is some sort of tank underneath the structure, underneath the building.
Is it an EPA Superfund site?
No comment.
Okay.
Mr. Wood?
I'm just wondering why we're striking the location, because when I think Highway Barn, I think of the one down off of, by the 49ers Club. I don't think of the Spring Street, although we had this discussion before, so clearly I know which one we're
that's a good
talking
point.
about. But we're not identifying the location in our order to say that it's surplus property, and I'm wondering if we should maybe pull that in a little bit.
sure.
So I'll make a motion to amend the amendment, because that's what we're talking about right now, and include after Highway Barn, comma, the building on Spring Street known as the Highway Barn, or demolish make a better motion.
No.
Demolish
Highway Barn
the
located?
building on Spring Street known as the Highway Barn, quotation mark, and strike
Does
Highway
it have
Barn
an
from
actual
that.
address on Spring Street?
Presumably. I don't know offhand.
Let me check. I believe it's 80 Spring Street, but I can check fairly quickly.
Start sending all my junk mail there. What? Sending all my junk mail there. When I signed up there.
And then just to clarify, the point of this right now, as it reads, is just for the town manager just to get a cost, and bring that cost back to us to obviously approve the appropriation, then the work would get done. So we're not really voting to tear it down, we're voting to see what it's going to cost to raise it.
Mr. President?
Yes.
If we go along with a cost on tearing it down, and we suspect that there is a tank underneath there, we're going to have to go into that area. We're going to have to see if all that soil is clean.
I think you've already done all the
that's
testing
been done?
inside. Yeah.
Done all that we can do so far.
Yeah.
Yes, 80 Spring Street. Which, just so you know, also includes the property currently known as BTB.
The picture shows BTV on the assessor's.
We don't want it.
So maybe not, maybe.
We could say the former Highway Barn at 88 Spring Street.
So is that, I'm going to sound like my father. Is that one parcel that contains two buildings?
Yeah.
Okay. So we can't declare the whole parcel as surplus. We would have to split the parcel to declare the first building as surplus, but not take down BTV and sell that.
So
I
we need,
didn't think you were declaring either at this point with the amendment, right?
no.
No, just to
Gets rid of it.
examine the cost.
It needs to be a bigger discussion is the point.
Demolish the highway barn. So if we clarified that, the highway barn at 80 Spring Street.
Right.
I'm good with that. Everybody
Yep.
good with that?
Yes.
Okay, we ready?
Did we,
With,
the amendment?
There's
is
a
that
motion.
how the amendment?
Yes,
should
that's
be?
the amended amendment. So on the amendment,
So we're voting on the amendment
to the amendment.
To the amendment.
to the amendment. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, now we're going to vote on the
Amendment.
the amendment,
Amended.
Amended.
the amended amendment. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Now we're acting under the main order, FY 20032. All those in favor, this does require a roll call vote? Yes, does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Souza,
Yes?
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Wood,
Yes.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. Rushton.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
8 in favor, none against.
Old business, none, new business, ordinance FY 20-002, general ordinance, dumpsters in residential zoning district, Councilor Conan Bowles. I guess we're going to postpone that. I have a red highlight here, a yellow highlight to postpone, so, am I correct? This is being postponed?
Oh, yeah, I'm
Okay.
sorry, yeah.
Order FY 20-033, acceptance of a gift, Bridgewater Savings Bank.
Motion to refer to the Budget and Finance Committees?
Second.
There's a motion to refer to committee, and there is a second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's been referred out. Resolution FY 20-005, FY 21 budget resolution. Council Wood, did you talk about this, right?
I did. Motion to move to Budget and Finance Committee.
Second.
Is there any discussion on that? Mr. Fitzgibbons?
I think, as Mr. Wood indicated earlier in our discussion, this is just a copy and paste from where we ended last year. There's been significant discussion at the council level and in the Budget and Finance Committee and the Finance Committees about the policies we need to set going forward. We can certainly discuss some of those this evening if folks want to, but again, as Mr. George encouraged, I'd encourage everyone to read it and get to Ann any policy suggestions that the Budget and Finance Committee should discuss, and then that can be funneled to Mr. Wood and the rest of our committee to, really think about and talk about and weigh and decide. So, this is kind of what sets our agenda for the next few months as far as budget goes. So it's an important document to take seriously and pay attention to.
Just said, if I can, any suggestions, you can just forward to Ann. She can collect them and forward them on to me for us. The other piece is that is commingled in here is that we will have a healthy discussion on forecasting free cash, for example, as well as the budget resolution. We'll probably step through this year's free cash to take a look at where the sources were from. We want to get a level of confidence on how to predict. I think the finance director has a pretty good model, but the three groups, the finance director, FinCom, and this team, need to agree on what the model, and that'll kind of drive any of the changes that are in the budget resolution. And ultimately, that drives how much money the town manager and finance director have to create the operational budget for the coming fiscal year. Thank you.
And the other thing that I'd like to comment on is I hope all of us take this out of our packet and put it in our little bags that we brought with us and take it home and read it. Some of the things that I brought up at the Budget and Finance Committee meeting early this evening is I really think we need to take a look at the policy of targeting free cash money in budgeting, so we have a percentage of our budget that's free cash, and that percentage right now is 1.75%. A lot of effort, as I have said many times, has gone into creating a good surplus in our capital funds through the free cash that we have received over the past several years. Last year, when we were talking about the budget, towards the end, we had already approved the budget resolution, and we were trying to find a little bit of money for the highway department, and we were trying to find a little bit of money for the schools. And a couple of the comments from the finance team was that, we kind of tied his hands a little bit based on this free cash policy, that he couldn't really, raise the revenues based on the restriction that's put on with this policy. So I just warn the council that I'd like to see that number be loosened up a little bit, and hopefully we'll have that discussion. So I'm going to take this with me.
And I just add to that, we just spent a little while tonight talking about $500,000 for an urgent, not emergent, road situation on Flag Street, and we were all wondering what's the next shoe that's going to drop, and the only place we have, other than going back to the voters of the town for an override vote or a debt exclusion vote or a capital fund vote, whatever they call that special one that we've never done, is our stabilization funds and our capital stabilization, et cetera. And so as we think about this, we have to balance all those items going forward. You know, we could have as much as $15 million of those road repairs coming at us if 10% of our streets have issues.
So it's a point well taken, and I'm sure we'll have to use some of our reserves to do some of that. I'm hoping, however, though, that, you know, when you talk about infrastructure, to the magnitude of that's where we need help from the state, and we get Chapter 90 monies. But I know that there have been supplemental budgets that the state legislature has approved that have put more money into Chapter 90 funds. Now, how much we have reaped from those supplemental budgets, I have no idea. But it's been a consistent supplemental budget practice over the last couple of years, at least, that more monies have been put into Chapter 90 monies once the budget's been approved. What we've gotten out of that, I have no idea, but I think more needs to be done in that direction to help not just the town of Bridgewater, many other cities and towns are in the same boat as far as infrastructure. So I would hate to see us have to resort to our reserves to fix all of our roads in town and not rely on some of the help from the state. Because we may have X number of miles of roads in the town, but I don't know if that number you mentioned earlier, Mr. Dutton, referred to the state-owned roads or just the ones the town owns?
138 miles?
As town-owned miles?
Those are...
Town-owned miles.
Right.
Okay, all right. Okay, where are we with this?
Vote to refer.
Vote to refer to the Budget and Finance. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Next item, Resolution FY 20-006, supporting the reduction of underage vaping in Bridgewater schools. Councilor Rushton.
Okay, given the late hour, I'll try not to beat this up, but if you read the order, it outlines some of the most recent statistics that I could find in Massachusetts related to vaping by underage kids. And you only have to look, so far to find that daily, there's districts and the issues that have been sort of been in the news is a statewide vaping ban right now due to the chemicals. Boston Globe reported today that some of the marijuana growers and industry providers, even from California, were asking the state of Massachusetts to even tighten up some of the controls on vaping and some of the stuff that's in the vaping products due to the issues that are arising. So I brought this up to the Public Safety Committee because I felt strongly myself personally that, I'm trying to be very respectful of sort of the district, having their own prerogative in terms of rules. But I think that for me, more this is symbolically a message of the town council supporting this order to say we are in favor of, anything that's going to help reduce vaping in the schools, which is a problem. We've talked to a couple of members of the school committee informally. I've emailed and had discussion with the superintendent, and from the school's perspective, there's a cost factor involved in what I'd like to see is vape detectors put into the bathrooms in the Bridgewater schools. It's relatively new technology, but it's a way to add a further deterrent in the bathrooms to keep vaping out of the schools. And so the school, from their perspective, there's a money issue, and then certainly there's some issue with the technology that's available. But despite those things, technology moves so quickly, I would leave it on myself if the council so chooses to support this, to work with the school through my liaison position to find grant funding to get these installed in the bathrooms with, of course, the school committee and the superintendent's blessing. But for me, it's more of a message to say we support this, and we should have some voice or opinion on the issue in terms of, underage kids vaping, not only in the town, but the schools as well.
Thank you. Any other comments regarding the resolution?
Do you want to refer it back to the Public Safety Committee, or do you want to leave it just here for next meeting?
According to my notes that are highlighted, It says there's no need to refer this to any committee. This would be the first reading,
Just
and then it
asking-
can come back at the
Just
next
asking
meeting.
the chairman of
for-
the Public Safety Committee.
Yeah, I prefer to state it.
Yep, so
Okay,
we'll.
good enough.
We'll bring it back in 2 weeks for a vote. Okay, got through this. Citizens' comments. Are there any citizens here that wish to speak during the citizens' comments portion of our meeting? Any citizens at all?
Good evening, Harry Bailey, 302 Pleasant Street. On the heavy truck jake brakes, this is a townwide problem. I live in Pleasant Street, and the speed limit in front of my house is 25 miles an hour. They go by, and the jake brakes are on it. If they're doing 25, they don't need to do that. When they see the police station, it quiets down. So, and I'm sure there's many other spots in town that this happens. The Town River Landing improvements, I'd like to thank Mr. Councilor Wood for extending it. I am involved in many of the committees that I am involved in with this project, just about all of them. I'm involved in this, the rivers and the land, and I'd like to thank him for extending that, because we have extensive plans going on. They haven't been fully negotiated yet, so by May 1st, we should have our answers. And there is another restaurant going in the downtown area. All right, I just want to, it'll come up probably at your next meeting, but there is another one. Thank you.
Are there any other citizens here wish to speak during the citizens' comments portion of our meeting? Seeing none, I'll move on to council comments. I'll begin with Mr. Souza.
Are you ready for Friday snow?
No
All
snow,
I have to
rain.
say.
Tuesday snow. Mr. Chase?
No comment.
Mr. Wood?
Sure. Over the past couple weeks, people have noticed the pumpkin people on the common. That was an idea that was generated by Eric Rodriguez, who's the current president of the Bridgewater Lions Club. I thought it was a pretty nice idea. He borrowed it from someplace in New Hampshire, I think. It was a small group to put the teams together, and maybe next year there'll be a competition among others. Everyone knows that this Saturday after Thanksgiving, I can't believe we're in November already, the Saturday after Thanksgiving, the decorations will go up. They're in pretty good shape this year, so we don't expect too much issue. I will say if there's anyone that needs volunteer hours, generally a high school kid, not someone, who's wearing an orange suit, but anyone who needs volunteer hours, contact one of the Lions. You can contact me. We'll find you something to do that day, and then we move on. Thank you.
Mr. George?
I am good, thank you.
Mr. Rushton?
I just wanted to briefly mention the passing of Richard Sproul's. He passed away on October 28th. Just wanted to acknowledge his 40 years of volunteering with Bridgewater Youth Soccer. It's extraordinary to think 40 years of volunteering down there. He coached my kids and many, many other children in the town of Bridgewater. I just wanted to acknowledge his time.
Yeah, I would like to second that. Dickie Sprouls coached my daughter's team, and he was a real kind of a grandfather figure for her and a lot of kids, I'm sure. And he's kind of a textbook example of someone who earlier in his life had a bad drug addiction and did some bad things, but then redeemed himself tenfold with his service to kids in this town. So I appreciate his life. Thank you.
Mr. Fitzgibbons? The only comment I want to make is I just hope that everyone can come to West Bridgewater Monday for the Veterans Day Tri-Town Parade. Again, it starts at, step off at 10 a.m. We walk down Elm Street, turn left on Center Street to the gazebo on North Main Street in West Bridgewater gazebo. I'm sure a few of my colleagues will join me there as we march as a town. Our next meeting is 2 weeks from tonight, November 19th. We do not have any executive session this evening. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.